Hey YouTube, in this video I'm be talking about how to beat speed walls that you might have. So speed wall in a sense being when you for at least one season have not progressed and you haven't been injured. If you face a speed wall, the aim of most people is to be like, okay, this is my peak, this is as fast as I'm gonna be, or it's to assume, okay, I'm too weak, I need to get stronger. And yes, the first one probably isn't true, but the second one was, yes, it is possible that you are weak. You are probably weak in areas that you're not going to focus on, such as your hip flexors, which is actually really important. You're probably going to focus more on your quads, your hamstrings, maybe your calves, even your upper body, places that are probably strong enough, and you don't need to be focusing on them anymore. You need to be focusing on what's actually going to help you improve. What I'm trying to say is, when people run into these speed walls, these speed blocks, they try to go to the gym and force strength to overcome it. But it's worth noting that this isn't the right method to go, because if you really wanted to improve, you'd have to focus on what's actually going to directly improve you, which is sprinting. If you want to get better at sprinting, you're going to have to sprint. A good example of this would be to compare Usain Bolt and Asafa Powell. Usain Bolt, he clean and jerks at most about 60 kg because of his scoliosis in his back. He can clean and jerk more, but if he wants to, unless he wants to ruin his back, he will never clean and jerk more than 60 kg. He never did clean and jerk more than 60 kg. Compare him to Asafa Powell, who's able to do box squats for 300 kg, I think, for 10 reps. Very, very, very different people. And what's worth knowing here is, I would say that Asafa Powell has the cleanest form of a male that we've ever seen. But Usain Bolt was faster than him, and he was faster than him for a few reasons. One of them was that his ground contact time was lower than Asafa Powell's, which is a form issue Asafa Powell never was able to address. Not that he couldn't address it, but he tensed up a lot in major races, which made it hard for him to have low ground contacts. So that was also partially part of the reason why Asafa Powell has slower personal bests than Usain Bolt does. Another thing is, Usain Bolt is able to have an extremely fast stride frequency along with his stride length. He's a genetic anomaly. If it wasn't for that, then Asafa Powell would probably be on par with Usain Bolt if they were about the same height. But if Asafa Powell was able to increase his stride frequency, then we might be able to see something like that as well. But to increase his stride frequency whilst maintaining his stride length, he'd have to decrease his ground contact time. So instead of him focusing on work in the gym, he could have focused on decreasing his ground contact time, which would have directly resulted in improvements in his sprinting, because the less time you spend on the ground, the more force you're able to produce and less braking force you're experiencing. Because essentially what happens is, the force you produced from the previous steps are stacked with the force you're producing now, which is why the first steps out of the blocks are really slow, because you're not producing much force out of the blocks. Probably like 2 to 3 times your body weight, if even that. But as you start to move faster and faster and faster, the amount of force you produce slowly starts to build up. It stacks, and this is why you're able to go from stationary to your max velocity, and there's a build up in between, because your ground contact times are decreasing, the amount of power you're producing into the ground is increasing, and now you're actually traveling, and your stride length is able to widen out properly as you're upright. So if you run into a speed wall and you don't know what to do, and you're thinking maybe you should go to the gym. I'm not saying don't go to the gym, because the gym is obviously very important for injury prevention and also to get stronger. But before you look at going to the gym to try and improve your abilities, try to focus on what's actually going to help you, which is your form. Because most likely you haven't actually hit a real speed wall. What you've hit is a wall with the form you have right now. If you're able to improve your form, then this speed wall that you have will just fade away like nothing. Because the only time where I would say, okay, maybe you should focus on something else instead of your form, would be if your form was as clean as Florence Griffiths Joyner, Flojo. And even her, if you spoke to her before she died, she'd probably tell you that yeah, her form is really good, but there's still improvements that can be made. So even such a person would agree that she still needs to focus on her form. Then why wouldn't you? Because the reason why she was so good was because her form was really good and she was able to stay relaxed. But you can always be more relaxed than before. She can still refine her biomechanics even more. And if your biomechanics are nowhere near hers, which by the way, if they were even close, as a male, you'd be sprinting sub 10 or close to sub 10. And as a female, similar standards. So you'd be sprinting sub 11 or close to that. If that's not happening, then obviously your form has a lot of work to do. Most likely, if you think this is the best I can do, I can't improve anymore, then you haven't realized what you need to work on to improve. For example, maybe you're really good upright sprinting, but your blocks are atrocious. Or maybe they don't look too atrocious, but you can't see that they look too atrocious. They look all right to you. When you go in races, you're next to everyone and everything else. There could be improvements to be made, because especially if you're strong enough, most likely you can sprint faster if you're able to reduce friction. You just want to be more reactive and reduce friction as you sprint. And there's a good chance that you have a lot of friction in your sprinting. Maybe you sprint with come out the blocks with your quads instead of your hips and your glutes, which is obviously very, 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 very difficult to do. It's much easier to figure out how to sprint upright with your hips and your glutes than it is to figure out how to push out the blocks with your hips and your glutes, which, to be honest, that part isn't the hard part. What's really hard is to continue to fire with your hips and your glutes until you get into upright sprinting without using your quads. That is, as if your body hasn't fixed its biomechanics, nigh impossible to deal with. And if you're not able to do that, or this is like foreign to you, then that should be a cue that your form has a lot of work to be done with to improve. Your form isn't the best, probably nowhere near the best, so you need to try and make it the best. As sprinters, we chase perfection, because perfection will get us the best possible times possible. It might even allow us to break world records. And if you haven't achieved a perfection with your form, it's all right, then that means you're going to need to improve. Because if your form is all right instead of being great, excellent, or perfect, then obviously there's you're going to need to improve. There's a lot you're leaving on the table, because the worse your form is, the more time you could take off. For example, your block starts, if they're that bad, they could allow you to take off 0.5 seconds. And this is 0.5 seconds even if you can use your hips and your glutes. It's still 0.5 seconds. And the reason why I say that is because maybe you're using your hips and your glutes for the first step, but are you using it for the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and so on and so on. Because what might happen is you push out the blocks with your hips and your glutes for the first step. You push out properly. But then like a few steps, like 5, 6 afterwards, you're not pushing properly. And then afterwards, you're upright now because you used your quads instead. So now you're firing with your hips and your glutes again, because it's much easier to do that whilst you're upright. And these few steps you missed, those 5, they might not seem too much, but that's where you generate the power, that's where you generate the momentum, and that's what propels you forwards. If you don't have enough momentum, then what's going to end up happening is, if you mess up these steps, you might do these steps fast, and you might be leading the race by 50 meters, but you're going to fade later on afterwards from there on, because everyone else in the field used less energy than you, because they resisted the movement of sprinting the least, less than you did anyway. So they were just essentially falling over for the first 5 or so steps, compared to you who's landing on the ground and pulling. You want to push when you're sprinting. I'd use more energy. So once you got to about 50 meters, everyone else who had a more calm, controlled acceleration than you will just catch you and pass you. And you're going to question why or how this happened. And the reason why is because their form was better than yours. Or maybe your upright sprinting isn't good. Which, to be honest, if you have good blocks, then this wouldn't really happen. Usually the blocks, that's the problem, because you disperse a lot of your energy because your blocks aren't done properly. But maybe your blocks are perfect, but when you get upright, you start using your quads. everything you just put into the ground, everything you just built up, all that momentum, it starts to get dispersed more and more and more and more, because the more you sprint with your quads, the harder it is for your body to land underneath you, and your quads are being activated earlier than they're supposed to, because your quads are supposed to activate once your foot lands on the ground and is slightly behind you, so they can propel you forwards. If it's activating before then it has to forcibly stay active until it gets to the position where it's supposed to, and then it pulls, which means you're using a muscle, and you can only fire your muscles out. You can only travel when your muscles are actively firing at a speed of 8 meters per second, I believe. So if that's happening, then it makes sense why your times aren't the best. In fact, it does happen to quite a few people, in fact, that they have really good block starts, but once they get upright, they struggle. Like you might see someone who has really good block starts. They beat you for the first 30-40 meters, but then they race an 800-meter person, for example, or 400-meter person in blocks, who, by the way, unless other than the 400-meter person, doesn't even know how to use blocks, and they lose the race. Why? Because let's use the 800-meter person as an example. Whilst the 800-meter person doesn't know how to use blocks, they know how to be controlled, and they're more used to just slowly building up their speed in a controlled manner, which, if this was your situation, you don't have. Used to exploding out and then trying to hold on, but you can't hold on to nothing, essentially. So you hold on, but there's nothing in your hands, so you just stall and you break down. If you want into speed voices, it's important that you look at things like this so you can actually try to improve. Because if you don't see these things to focus on, to work on, so you can actually improve, you will never improve. Because I would say, no matter what your genetics are, you can sprint sub 11, unless you're injured, in which case fix the injury. You can sprint sub 11. Everyone has the ability to sprint sub 11 as long as they're fit and they're not disabled. They should be able to sprint sub 11 without any problems. If you're not sprinting sub 11, then you're either unfit, disabled, or your biomechanics aren't good enough to allow you to pull that off. Myself included, my biomechanics aren't sound enough to do that. The person who I was referencing when I was talking about the first step was good and then the other few steps weren't out of the blocks was myself, because I'm able to have essentially a perfect first step out of the blocks, but after that I forget to fire my glutes and they don't fire properly. But once I'm upright, I'm fine again, but I've already lost all of the momentum that I've generated, meaning I could have been sprinting much faster, but because I didn't fire properly, I'm not able to. And maybe this is your problem too. Whatever your problem is, make sure you identify it, as make sure this problem you identify is a form problem, not some other problem that you've magically decided is the problem, and you fix it. Maybe you won't be able to fix it by the end of the season, but fixing it next season so you can see it in your 60s, you can see it when you start to do your races again, when your outdoor season opens, is important if you actually want to get faster. If you like my video, like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.